Hey peeps, welcome to the Crafty Witch UK, the Wordy Witch UK, and welcome to the final part of my Freda Friday celebration of the works of Freda Warrington and my favourite of those, Dark Cathedral. So we are on the final chapter of the first third of the book, and we ended with Beth being back at school for 3 weeks, feeling ill, and then her period not arriving. So I'm sure we can all imagine how she might be feeling and what might be about to transpire within the story. So grab yourself some crafting or a cuppa and let me tell you the rest of this story. Dark Cathedral, Chapter 7. Mrs. Hearn, said the doctor, I'm afraid the cause of your daughter's symptoms is that she is approximately 12 weeks pregnant. Beth's mother made a small noise of exasperation. Doctor, with all due respect, I don't think you've listened to a word I've said. I brought the child in with a stomach bug. Every young woman who goes off her food is not automatically pregnant. The doctor tapped his pen on his desk. Beth's head drooped lower, her hair hiding her face. I am aware of that, Mrs. Hearn. However, having examined her, I find Beth to have all the symptoms of early pregnancy. A urine test will confirm things, but there is no need for a test, Olivia said crisply, because there is absolutely no possibility whatsoever of Beth being pregnant. Please God, let me die, thought Beth. She was going to pass out at the very least. The doctor cleared his throat. Mrs. Hearn, would you mind if I spoke to Beth alone? Yes, I would. Anything you have to say to her, you can say to me. Beth? Beth nodded. She daren't do anything else. The doctor went on. I know this must have come as a shock, but the important thing is not to judge Beth. She needs support. There are different options to consider. I think you've wasted quite enough of our time already. Thank you. We're leaving. Olivia took Beth's wrist, led her out of the surgery and along the street. Neither of them said a word. Beth's bones had turned to dough with terror. She expected her mother to fly into a ferocious rage as soon as they were home. Instead, Olivia remained silent and closed, like a waxwork. She seemed to move in slow motion as she took off her coat and shoes. Beth longed to blurt out, Mum, please listen to me, please try to understand. But she was afraid that a single word would unleash a hair-trigger retaliation. Go to your room, Bethia, said Olivia woodenly. I need to pray. Beth obeyed. She shut herself in and sat on her bed, her mind a blank. After a few minutes, she heard the key turn in the lock. No prisoner in a condemned cell could have felt worse than she did at that moment. Nothing to do but wait for the hangman. She couldn't pray. Nothing Rhiannon had told her had removed the image of a thunderous, punishing God from her mind. She knew her sins lay not merely in having sex, but in disobedience, lies, the breaking of solemn vows. Her pregnancy was the tip of a very dark and murky iceberg. Will God tell Mum to believe the doctor? Will he tell her to forgive me? She pressed her knees together and hugged herself. She was so cold she couldn't move. How did it happen? We were so careful. It was that time on the Hellstone. Beth was certain of it. The malevolent figures, the horn piercing her, the eyes of the goddess. And the way Morgan had gone quiet after, as if he knew something was wrong and wouldn't tell her. Everything had been weird. Hideous thoughts tormented her. What if Mum was right? What if Rhiannon and Morgan bewitched me into thinking they were kind and loving when really they belonged to Satan after all? 4 hours passed. It was December, so night came early. Beth walked around, tried to sleep, walked around again. She was growing frantic. She desperately needed the loo. The last thing she wanted was food, and yet she felt sick and lightheaded from the lack of it. She heard faint noises from downstairs. Voices, doors opening and shutting. Things were happening behind her back. The key turned. Beth drew a breath. She felt cold and brittle, an icicle. Her father came in, alone. He was still wearing his grey suit from work, and he stood with his right hand cupped in his left, his face composed, but his eyes, behind the sterile shine of glasses, hung on her like lead. He'd never raised a hand to her, yet Beth was terrified of him. "Beth," he said quietly, "do you have anything to tell me?" "I really need to go to the bathroom, Dad." "Go on, quickly." She rushed along the landing, grateful for a few minutes of reprieve, her bowels loose with sheer terror. When she came back, feeling drained and shaky, Philip closed the door and faced her. His voice was soft and confidential, like the voice he used with his dental patients. "Just tell me, Beth, is there any possibility that you could be pregnant?" Beth looked at the floor. Her throat went into spasm, which she couldn't swallow away. After a few seconds, she managed, miserably, to nod. Philip put a hand to his face. She heard a long sigh emerge, muffled by his fingers. His eyes weren't even cold. They were dead, as if he had no feeling for her at all, not even anger, as if she had ceased to exist. "Can you tell me how this could have happened?" She shook her head. "I'm afraid you'll have to stay in here until you're ready to tell us. God is deeply grieved by your behaviour, Bethia. I will pray for you." He went to the door, and she blurted out, "Dad, I'm sorry." But he was gone, locking the door again behind him. Beth got on the bed and shrank into the corner, looking at the bare walls and the shelves with nothing on them but Bibles and schoolbooks. Morgan had made her feel so grown up, so free. The devil's illusions. This was reality. She was a powerless, sinful child. As she sat in the darkness, she made a decision. "I'll never tell them about Rhiannon. I'll never tell them who the father is. I could pretend some boy in the village attacked me. But no, that would be another lie. My only defence, my only hope is silence. Dear Goddess, please help me." It wasn't long before the door opened again, bringing a fan of yellow light from the landing. This time it was Heather. "Grandma," Beth said, sitting up, "what are you doing here?" "Brought you a cup of tea," said Heather, sitting on the bed. "Your mother called us. She's acting like there's been a death in the family." Beth swallowed the tea gratefully, clutching the mug in both hands for warmth. "How did it happen?" Heather asked gravely, folding her arms. "One of the village boys, was it?" "Sort of, yes." "Who?" Beth didn't reply. "You are a stupid little girl." Heather was very much the exasperated headmistress. Beth sensed no sympathy, although she hadn't expected any. The lack of it still stabbed her. "I trusted you. I really thought you'd have more sense. Did it ever cross your tiny mind that I am going to get the blame for this? I was responsible for you." "That's not fair on you, Gran," said Beth. "It was all my fault." "Well, it was at least half the boys as well. You're going to have to tell us who it was. Drink your tea. They want to talk to you downstairs. Ready to face the world?" Beth had no choice. She'd been summoned. "How's Mum?" "Still trying to pretend it hasn't happened, though she knows damn well it has," Heather said grimly, propelling her along the landing. Her interrogators were waiting in the sitting room. Her father on his feet, Randolph and Luke sitting on the sofa, Olivia in the armchair. The room was stuffy and too bright, sweltering in the heat of the gas fire. Heather ushered Beth to the chair opposite her mother, then went to sit beside Randolph. Olivia's countenance was pale and stiff with fury. She was rigidly composed, hands on her lap. Beth quailed. Even the sight of Luke frightened her. He was like a replica of their father, serene and precise. Bizarre the way their roles had reversed. Luke now the saint, Beth the black sheep. Beth felt blood rush to her face. How ghastly to face Luke and her granddad knowing that they knew. Randolph didn't look directly at her, but he was a formidable presence in the room, another figure of disappointed, judgmental authority. "Have you had anything to eat?" he asked as Beth sat down. "I'm not hungry." He looked at Olivia. "She must eat, or she'll be ill." "Father, can you stop being a doctor for 5 minutes?" Olivia broke in. "She can eat after she's confessed." "Don't be afraid," Randolph said gently. "No one's going to shout at you. We just want you to tell us what happened." Beth couldn't make a sound. "How long have you known you were in this state?" asked Olivia, her calm restraint forced. "I didn't know," Beth said. She had, in her heart, but she'd been praying the symptoms would go away by magic. "You must have suspected. Why didn't you tell us?" I couldn't. I knew you'd go mad." "Who was he?" "Just a boy. It doesn't matter." "When did it happen? Where did it happen? Did he force you? You can't have consented." Beth squeezed her eyes shut. Philip said, "You must tell us who he is so he can be punished." All through this, she felt Luke's eyes burning into her. "I know," his eyes said. "I know." "It only has to happen once," said her grandfather. "One mistake, a boy tricks you, takes advantage of your innocence. You probably don't even realise what's happening until it's too late. His fault, not yours. Is that what happened, Beth?" This was the scene they'd concocted in their minds to try to preserve her innocence. Hating herself, Beth nodded. "There, not her fault," said Randolph. "It doesn't matter. She's still been soiled," Olivia said. "Oh, God Almighty, what have I done to deserve this? How could you, Beth? After all my warnings, my strict instructions to keep yourself pure, how could you let the devil ruin you?" "That's enough," said Heather. "I'm sorry, Mum," said Beth, starting to cry. "I'm really, really sorry." Olivia suddenly came to Beth, knelt beside her and clasped her hands. "How could you let this happen, darling? I wanted you to be perfect in God's eyes. You were such a good girl. I knew I shouldn't have let you stay at Mother's. It's all my fault. I was selfish. I should have been looking after you myself." And they cried together, and Beth thought, "It's going to be all right. She's just going to forgive me." "Just tell us who he is, darling," Olivia went on. "Tell us." "No, I can't. It doesn't matter." "You must." Beth shook her head stubbornly. She would have been admitting not one sin, but years of sin. The secret was all that she had left. Olivia sighed. "Let's pray for guidance," she said, and they bowed their heads and clasped their hands, even her grandparents. There was a long moment of tranquillity. Into it, like a little knife, came Luke's voice. "I know who the father of Beth's baby is." Beth felt a hideous jolt of coldness. "Shut up!" she cried. "It's that Morgan Reese who lives up Farm Lane." Silence. And then the worst sound she had ever heard, piercing her ears and shredding her nerves, Olivia screaming, a hoarse, high-pitched wail of absolute horror and betrayal. Beth shrank away, hands over her ears, a hand slammed into the side of her head. Panicking, Beth scrambled over the arm of the chair, but Olivia came after her, hitting and hitting. Beth fell onto the carpet. Olivia's face rose over her, eyes bloodshot, spittle flying from her mouth. "You disgusting, vile, evil, wanton, stupid, little whore!" Beth shut her eyes, cowering. The blows stopped suddenly. Randolph was holding Olivia back, and the others were on their feet. "For God's sake, Livy," said Randolph, "have some thought for her condition." "Have some thought, Dad," Olivia shouted in his face. "Have some thought." Grim-faced, Randolph pulled her away, forced her down onto the sofa. Philip helped Beth back to her chair, his touch impersonal. He offered her no comfort. "Can we at least establish the facts?" Heather said briskly. "Beth, Luke, is this true?" "Yes, it's true," said Luke. "She's been friendly with the witch and her son for years." "Did she go out for a lot of walks, Gran?" She was going to see them. That Morgan did it to her. Olivia turned on him now. "You're lying." "I wouldn't lie, Mum. Ask her." They were all staring at her. Beth felt cornered. There seemed no point in denying any more. Yes. Jesus, muttered Philip. Her grandfather leaned his head on his hands and exhaled. Oh, God. And her grandmother exclaimed with a degree of viciousness that shocked Beth. That bloody boy! That bloody little bastard! This is your fault, Mother, Olivia shouted. You were meant to be protecting her. What was I supposed to do? Keep her handcuffed? Good grief. As if we didn't tell her enough times to have nothing to do with them. She looked hard from Luke to Beth. You'd better tell us precisely what went on. Between them, the story came out, haltingly, into a well of dark, disapproving tension. I only went to Rhiannon's the first year, said Luke, and only because Beth made me. I didn't want to tell tales on her, so I prayed for her instead. Olivia, though, was no longer interested in Luke's sins. She stared at Beth with a frightful, contorted expression of incredulity, as if Beth had not merely betrayed her, but stabbed her. You evil liar. After all I said, every summer, you lying evil bitch. Satan's got hold of you and he is working through you. Can't you see it? That boy belongs to the devil. Did he force you? Did he trick you? What? It happened just once, did it? Beth was past lying. More than once, and he never forced me. How many times? 27, Beth said helplessly. Olivia tried to leap up and would have slapped her if Randolph hadn't held her back. You filthy whore! Heather looked murderous. Still terrified, but stung to outrage, Beth cried, Why is Morgan worse than any other boy? Rhiannon isn't evil. She was nice to me. I know I did wrong, but... She faltered, knowing they wouldn't listen. I love Morgan. We promised to each other that we would be together when we leave school. We can get married. It will be all right. Jesus, her father said again. We'll have to get rid of it, Heather said crisply. Pretend it never happened. What? Beth cried, aghast. No, said Philip, that would be a crime against God. Olivia went white. Yes, it must be got rid of, she whispered. I can arrange a termination, Randolph said heavily. We'll talk to Beth's GP, the sooner the better. Beth couldn't believe her ears. Her mother had always been vehemently against abortion. Secretly, since knowing Rhiannon, Beth wasn't, and if it had been the child of any other boy, she would have been relieved. But this was special. This was Morgan's. No, said Beth. You can't make me do it. I told you, I love him. What do you know about love, you silly girl? Heather snapped. He was using you. He was nearly thrown out of school for being caught with some girl. He should be castrated with balling twine. The devil works through that family, Olivia said, her voice low. That thing you're carrying is the child of the devil. Beth's head was spinning. Some girl? He was using you? The devil? Olivia rose to her feet. Randolph tried to stop her, but she shook him off, saying, It's all right, Father. She stood over Beth with terrifying calmness, her face haggard, all her revulsion and condemnation gathered in the poisonous blue light of her eyes. Bitch, she hissed. I nearly went against God's law for you. This is what you've brought me to. Beth shrank inwardly. She understood. Olivia had been prepared to go against her heartfelt beliefs to dispose of the baby. That was how deeply she loathed Morgan. The realisation hurt Beth worse than any physical blow. No, Olivia went on thinly. You shall have the thing, if only to make you understand that you shall not sin without punishment. You think you want it, do you? It won't be a human being. It will be the fruit of your sins. You'll have to have it adopted, Heather said harshly. No, I'll look after it, said Olivia. But can it ever be cleansed and live a Christian life? I doubt it. Can you ever be cleansed, Bethia? I won't have the devil working through this family. You'll deliver the child into my hands, and I shall bring it to God. The room turned dark. The rest of the family didn't seem to hear the threat in Olivia's voice, but Beth was drowning, utterly alone. She could see nothing but her mother's burning eyes. What are you, Beth? I thought you were an angel, above the banal filth of the world. Instead, I discover you've been rolling in it like everyone else. You're a stranger. You're not my daughter. Beth lay awake all night with the words walking around her head, as dark as physical rats. Not my daughter. The sense of total betrayal in Olivia's eyes tormented Beth. She thought, I didn't mean to do that to her. What was it that I did that was so very awful? I guess it must have been. What am I then? An orphan? A changeling? Nothing? Not my mother's daughter. Just a piece of treacherous filth. In the morning, her grandfather came in, sat on the end of her bed. He was wearing his overcoat, about to set off home. How did you sleep? Not too well. I'm scared. Are you sure you want to go through with the pregnancy? I don't know. I can't not. But Mum... There was some kindness in Randolph's eyes, under the thick charcoal brows. Perhaps she'd misjudged him. Your mother will forgive you. Give her time. I don't think she will. Do you forgive me, Grandad? These things are so difficult. Everyone does foolish things, Beth. I can't condemn you for falling in love. I'm not sure I can forgive the boy, though. Will he get into trouble? I don't know. He deserves to. She whispered, Grandad, would you post a letter to Morgan for me if I wrote it quickly? He shook his head, looking sadly at her. I don't think that would be appropriate. Your mother wouldn't want it, and I mustn't compound my negligence. What do you mean? I blame myself for what happened. Beth was stunned. Why? I was never there for you. I was always working. If I'd known you were so lonely with your grandma and me, that I had to look for friends elsewhere, I should have realised what was happening, but I didn't. My fault. Desperate, she said, Grandad, don't leave me. I have to go to work, he said gravely. Olivia will look after you. Don't worry. No one asked Beth how she felt. Olivia kept Beth off school that morning. They passed the day in bitter silence as wide as a lake. That night, in utter exhaustion, Beth slept. She dreamed of drowning in green water with blood clouds exploding all around her. She dreamed of a white horn piercing her in her side, her stomach, her womb. She saw dark figures flapping towards her through the underwater forest, and she knew that when they reached her, she'd die. She dreamed Morgan was pinning her down on the hellstone, only he was really a demon in the shape of a black cat with fangs and claws. His penis, the ivory horn again, delivered a perfectly formed demon baby into her womb. She climaxed anyway, as if to show that she had invited the sin. Then the baby began to talk to her. You can't let me go. We must stay together. We're in danger. Our kind have always been in danger. Beth woke, shaking and sweating, to find Luke leaning over her. He was growing into a stocky youth, stronger and taller than Beth. You dirty bitch, he whispered venomously. I knew you were doing it with that Morgan. She sat up, shaken. You didn't know. You had no right to say anything. Luke was glaring at her, as if she was something that he'd trodden in. And then he smiled coldly. Guessed right, though, didn't I? You let him fuck you. Why did you have to tell them? To save your soul, sister. It wasn't fair, Beth cried. You never told on me before. I thought I could trust you. I never told on you when you did something wrong. I always tried to look after you. Yes, until you dropped me for them. I didn't drop you. It was me or them, Beth. You chose them. You chose the devil. I used to really look up to you when I was little. I used to think you were a saint, but you're not. You're just a common tart like all the others. What others? The girls at school. They're all prosies. I tell you what's unfair. Mum used to beat me for doing nothing, but she doesn't even beat you when you get pregnant. She didn't even slap you when I told her you did it with someone who worships the devil. He does not. You know how witches are made, don't you? They go into the woods and they make a pact with the devil. Then they copulate with him to seal it. And that's what you did. That's exactly what you did. No! Oh, you're in for it now. You're damned. I told you your sins would find you out, didn't I? Serves you right. His eyes were merciless, and she saw years of resentment there burning. Luke had been storing up his hatred of Morgan for all of this time, and she hadn't realised. She hadn't sinned. Now he was having his revenge. In the morning, Beth tried to write to Morgan in the secrecy of her room. She tried, but the words wouldn't come. She was scared to set a single word on paper in case her mother saw it. Scared of what Morgan's reaction would be. What if he was horrified, or worse, utterly indifferent? What could he do anyway? The furthest she got was printing his address on the envelope. Morgan Rees, Blackthorn Cottage, Farm Lane, Lullingford, Staffs. The postcode. What was the postcode? Didn't matter. She sat and traced her fingers over the beloved address as if it were a photograph. The door opened. Beth flung the envelope into a bedside drawer, but it was too late. Her mother had seen. "What are you hiding?" Olivia snapped. She strode forward, wrenched the drawer open and seized the envelope. There was 1 second of bristling silence while she scanned it. Then she swung round and her hand felled Beth like a sandbag, knocking her back across the bed. "Jezebel!" she screamed, ripping up the envelope. "How dare you! What will it take to teach you, you devious, addle-brained bitch?" The strap. There was no one else in the house. No one to stop Olivia laying into Beth until they were both crying with exhaustion and Beth had bitten her mouth to shreds to kill the burning, throbbing pain in her back. "If you ever tried to contact that ungodly fornicator again," Olivia panted, standing over Beth where she lay on the bed, "you will wish you had never been born." Beth got the message. She lay on her stomach in agony, praying for her mother to leave her alone, praying to die. "Jesus loves you, Bethia, but he hates the demon inside of you," breathed Olivia, eerily calm. "I won't rest until I've driven it out. Cleanse it. Cleanse." She walked away a few minutes later. Through sheets of pain, Beth heard the vacuum cleaner droning. One afternoon in mid-December, while Rhiannon was contentedly doling out cat food for Lou and Carrot and Bast, a storm arrived on her doorstep. She answered a knock at the front door to find Olivia Hearn standing there. Rhiannon was startled. For a moment she didn't recognise the handsome woman in raincoat, with fierce blue eyes and brown hair gathered in a bun. Then her instincts kicked in, and she knew, ominously, that this was about Beth. They found out that Beth was coming here, she thought. Had to happen. "Your bastard," said Olivia, "got my daughter pregnant." Rhiannon felt the earth drop out from under her, and she laughed in disbelief. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me." Rhiannon controlled herself and said coolly, "If you're referring to Morgan, you'd better come in." "You knew, didn't you?" Olivia shoved Rhiannon hard in the shoulder and walked past her into the cottage. "You knew. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "Liar!" Olivia stood in the centre of the front room, glancing in contempt at incense burners and images of goddesses. In her eyes, these were signs of Rhiannon's inner pollution. Her tone was cold and savage. "How long has he been corrupting my daughter? Was it just last summer, or for the past 4 years? Rhiannon was furious. "Hang on. What right have you got to come in here accusing my son of molesting a child?" "A child, exactly. Don't try to defend him, because she's told me what he did to her. Taking her in the woods and doing those filthy things. You knew what was going on, didn't you? You encouraged it." "Of course I didn't," Rhiannon flared. "If you're telling me the truth, I'll murder him. I thought I could trust him. I specifically told him, treat Beth like a sister. I warned him countless times." "And I told Bethia to stay away from you," said Olivia. "If she took no notice of me, why should your brat listen to you? You must have known she wasn't allowed to come here, but you didn't send her away, did you? You encouraged her. What gives you the right to usurp my rights as a mother? Did you think it was amusing to get at me like that?" "Yes," said Rhiannon. "It was more than amusing, dear. I was trying to save her sanity. She came to me one year suicidal because her periods had started and you had given her the impression that she was too filthy to live. Wonderful mother you are." "I did nothing of the sort." "Whatever you intended, that's the impression she got. So I put her right." "Oh, did you? And how are you going to put this right?" said Olivia contemptuously. "Herbal potions? A spell?" Don't mock what you don't understand. You'd better tell me what Beth said. As Olivia acidly related Beth's confession, Rhiannon knew that what she was being told was the truth. All those times I blithely let Morgan take Beth for walks and bike rides. What a bloody fool I was. That was egotism, thinking no son of mine would break a promise. Why did I feel the need to warn him so often if I didn't know in my heart that he wasn't to be trusted? I'll give Morgan hell for this, said Rhiannon. I never meant it to happen, Livy, I swear. Don't call me Livy. This is what this has come to. You wanted to put the devil into my daughter and you've succeeded. You'll burn in hell, you bitch. Would you like a cup of tea? Rhiannon asked sweetly. Olivia, I won't touch anything of yours. How is Beth? Olivia looked startled, as if the question had never occurred to her. She's learning her lesson. Goddess, Rhiannon whispered. I do know some very specific herbs. She insists on having the damn thing, said Olivia, tight-lipped. Let her have it. God did not mean women to have an easy escape from their sin. Oh, shit, said Rhiannon. Look, if you really can't bear what's happening, send her to me. I'll look after her. Olivia glared at her. You must be out of your mind. Send her to you with that evil raping bastard in the house. If you're referring to Morgan, Rhiannon said icily, he wouldn't be here. I'll send him away to college or something. I don't care. You won't have her. This is a battle for Beth's soul. You'll never win. She needs Christian guidance, not pagan immorality. Haven't you done enough? Poor Beth, Rhiannon said under her breath. Well, if I can't help and you finish shouting at me, then you'd better go. I haven't finished, Olivia snapped. We want you to leave. Leave my home. Go away. Take the bastard with you. Don't be stupid. I'm deadly serious. Rhiannon saw shadows from the corner of her eye, turned and saw the others standing in the open doorway. Philip, Heather, Randolph, staring her down with leaden eyes. You can't make me. But if you stay, we'll make sure Morgan is prosecuted for child abuse, sex with an underage girl, anything we can throw at him. So if you don't want him to go through life with a criminal record, you'll get out of here. They won't do anything to a 16-year-old. But Rhiannon's heart speeded up. She wanted to deal with him herself, and the thought of him even being questioned by social services and the police made her feel ill. No, we can easily get Beth to say he raped her. What? Rhiannon gasped. Even you wouldn't sink that low. But Olivia's eyes were blue steel. Do you want to risk it? Even if he wasn't found guilty, mud sticks. Just go, and don't either of you make any attempt to contact my daughter ever again. You owe it to us. Heather said from the doorway, You're meant to be wise, Mrs. Reese. You know Morgan and Beth can't possibly be allowed to see each other again. I know, said Rhiannon. She couldn't look at any of them. I know. So take him away, for Beth's sake. Rhiannon glanced at Philip, then at Randolph, their faces sombre, resolute, only a touch ashamed. What am I supposed to say to this? She said. Es-tu brute? Randolph only said sorrowfully, How could you let this happen? A couple of hours after they'd gone, Morgan came home from school, affectionate and cheerful as always. Rhiannon was slicing vegetables on a worktop. He threw his bag on a kitchen chair, slid up to her and kissed her cheek. Steady on, Mum. What have those poor carrots ever done to you? She threw the knife down, turned around and whacked him as hard as she could across the face. He reeled away, gasping, For Christ's sake, what was that for? Think about it. You were screwing her all summer. Oh, what a surprise. Now she's expecting a baby. Morgan went absolutely white. Even the red marks she'd made bleached away. Oh, Christ, you mean Beth? Yes, I mean Beth, she shouted. How many more irate parents can I expect round here making threats? Get in the other room. He sat on the edge of the sofa under the onslaught, his head resting on one hand. Rhiannon paced about, so furious it was all she could do not to strike him again. How could you, Morgan? How many times did I tell you? Be a friend to her, I said. Treat her like a sister, I said. I said it 1,000 times. I thought I could trust you. I'm sorry, Mum, he said faintly. I didn't plan it. Beth trusted you. So you just took advantage of her, did you? It wasn't like that. We're in love. Oh, love, is it? You could have at least taken precautions. We did. Oh, did you? You could have used them every time. You know, not just when you think about it. Mum, we did. Even the first time. So how can you claim you didn't plan it? Just carry them around on the off chance, do you? Morgan didn't reply. He was such a beautiful youth. Who could blame Beth for falling? Yet it was his beauty that made her angry, because he thought he could have everything his own way, break all the hearts in his path and never be touched. So, these precautions, she said. What went wrong? One of them split, he murmured. I didn't tell Beth. I didn't want to worry her. Well, I imagine she's worried enough now. I could have told you that they're not infallible. For God's sake, what were you thinking of? I told you. I love her. But she is only 14. 14, Morgan. What you did was against the law. We didn't think. It didn't seem wrong. Well, it was wrong. More wrong than you can imagine. If you'd really loved her, you would have left her alone. If she'd said no, I would have done. Morgan met Rhiannon's eyes, defiant. But she didn't put up much of a fight, I can tell you. Rhiannon gasped. Don't you dare blame her. I am so ashamed of you. He stood up suddenly, folding his bony arms. I can't believe you're going on like this. You're the one who always told me there was nothing wrong with sex. You told Beth it was sacred too. Yes, between consenting adults. Sacred means to be treated with respect, not indulged in at a whim. I thought I'd explained that too. Do you need your ears syringing or what? I've spoiled you. I have to beg your headmaster to reinstate you after you've been caught with some female in the school grounds. Oh, but he's a good boy. He's not really like that. She led him on. And now you do this? I'm not that bad. I don't take drugs. I don't smoke. But you expect me to be sodding perfect. You're the one who wanted to take Beth away from her mother. Yes, by making Beth strong, not by ruining her life. Morgan went quiet, his face lengthening. She's not having it, is she? Apparently she wants to. Her parents won't contemplate abortion anyway, and goddess knows what will become of her. But, oh my God, he half turned away, speechless for once. Oh my God, and then, I love her, I want to see her. Well, you can't. Why not? Her parents won't let you, and neither will I. Morgan glared at her between strands of dark hair. I've never had a father. Is it going to be like that for Beth's kid too? Oh, listen to the voice of responsibility. You haven't a clue what you're talking about. You are both too young, you can't cope with babies, you'd end up hating each other. Her family are impossible. You can't stop me seeing her. If you try, her family will have you prosecuted. Unlawful sexual intercourse, or I think they call it rape. Christ, said Morgan, turning pale again. It's not fair. I would never have forced her. She wanted it as much as I did. Oh, Christ. Rhiannon felt gratified to have shaken him up. You have got to learn that you can't have everything your own way. We're leaving. You can finish your A-levels at college and forget about Beth. You have a very long way to go before you can prove that I can trust you again. You can't stop me seeing her, Morgan said fervently. Go to hell. And he marched into the kitchen. Hearing the back door slam, Rhiannon shuddered. He'll be back, she thought. And one day, when he understands, I hope he'll forgive me. Through the wintry twilight, Morgan walked across the fields behind the cottage in no particular direction, brooding, furious with Rhiannon. It was as much the humiliation of being found out as anything. An illicit relationship was glamorous and exciting. The mess it created was not. He wanted Beth as he remembered her, fresh, pretty, responsive. He wanted her in defiance of his mother and her parents. But pregnant? Maybe tired? Preoccupied? Her body swelling? He wasn't sure. To think of being married with a small child instead of looking forward to a life of freedom, of university, Jesus, that was scary. But Beth? The truth was, Morgan didn't know what he wanted. There was a figure coming along the hedgerow towards him, through the gloom, a woman in a tweed skirt, green Barber jacket and headscarf, carrying a shotgun. Heather Cross. He kept his head down, meaning to give her a wide berth, but she stopped in his path. And then she aimed the shotgun straight at his chest, her eyes psychotic with hatred. "I should shoot you where you stand for what you did," Mrs. Cross said. "You evil bastard." Morgan stared at her in unguarded terror. "You'd be done for murder. Do you think I care? They can lock me away. It'll be too late for you." He heard the ominous crunch of the safety catch. Then she lowered the barrel to point at his loins. "We geld horses humanely. That's too good for you. If you ever go near my granddaughter again, I will blast your bollocks through the top of your head." Paralysed, he watched her finger squeezing the trigger. The moment was unreal, a nightmare condensed. Then there was a deafening bang, and the earth at his feet exploded. "If I ever see you again," she hissed, "I won't be shooting at the ground." Morgan backed away and began to run. When he glanced back, she was still there staring at him. "Maybe you're right," he said, walking back into the kitchen, trying to act like nothing had happened. "We should leave after all." "What's come over you?" Rhiannon asked. "Nothing. Been thinking, that's all. I'm really truly sorry. I wouldn't hurt Beth for anything." Softening, Rhiannon put her arm around him and stroked his shoulder. "It was my fault, love. I should have guessed what was happening with you two and stopped it. I suppose I did guess, but I didn't want to believe it. I won't let you ruin your life over one mistake. I know it hurts, but it's for the best, believe me." "Yeah. By the way, what was that shot?" Morgan shrugged. "Someone shooting rabbits?" "Come in, Bethia," said the pastor. There were 10 members of the church waiting in the sitting room, including Olivia. Their smiles were stern, sorrowful, condescending. Beth went in among them like a lamb among hyenas. "You've fallen in deep sin, sister," said Pastor Blair. "The good news is that you can be purified and washed clean. But first, we have to drive the devil out of you." They were all around her, holding her, stroking her, talking, praying. "Confess your sins, Bethia. Let it spill out. You have to admit the devil is in you before we can tear it out." "He wasn't a devil," she said defiantly. "He loves me." "He deceived you," said the pastor. He was stout and whiskery and smelled of stale tobacco. "He tempted you into foul acts of fornication. That's the devil's way." "No." "Repent, Bethia. Your soul is in peril." The exorcism was loud and violent. They began to throw her from one to another, praying and singing. The pastor repeatedly cast her to the floor, shouting for the Lord to take the evil out of the fallen soul. He yelled straight into Beth's face, commanding the demon to depart, shredding her nerves to rags. Out of her wits with fear, Beth submitted. It went on all afternoon. In the end, weak with confusion and lack of food, she would have said anything to make it stop. "Yes, there's a demon in me. He put it there. It talks to me. I repent. Help me, help me." And afterwards, Beth realised the true purpose of the exorcism. She sat, shaking, trying to drink a mug of sickly cocoa that Olivia had made. As what? A consolation prize? A token of guilty love? And she thought, they weren't trying to save my soul. They were trying to make me have a miscarriage. It didn't work. From the day her sins had come to light, Beth was kept a prisoner at home. Her mother removed her from school. When the truant officer came round and pointed out that she couldn't do this, Olivia became devious and plausible, finally convincing the doctor to excuse Beth from school on medical grounds. Under her mother's direction, Beth complained of exhaustion, depression, 6 reasons why she couldn't face school, and she barely had to exaggerate. She had only to be careful when the doctor prodded her abdomen that he did not see the marks on her back. Philip arranged for a tutor to come to the house instead, a retired teacher who was a fervent member of the church. Beth loathed him. She was never left alone. If Olivia had to go out, people from the church would come and sit with her instead. The only time Beth went out was for her antenatal pre-checks. She was too sinful even to be seen at church, apparently. A social worker came to the house a couple of times. Under Olivia's supervision, Beth assured her that everything was fine at home. Her mother would be helping with the baby. She was perfectly happy, thank you very much. And every day, as Beth's condition grew more blatant, she had to endure the contemptuous stares of her family whenever they glanced at her swelling stomach. Olivia literally believed that the devil had worked through Morgan. And what could Beth say? She couldn't dismiss her mother as mad, because Beth had been surrounded by these beliefs from childhood. Lots of apparently sane people shared them. Rhiannon had made these beliefs seem absurd, but Rhiannon wasn't here, and she had always been light-hearted about her goddess, whereas the people who surrounded Beth now were heavy-handed, passionately convinced. Beth hadn't the strength to decide. You are all crazy. Not when her ghastly dreams seemed to be coming directly from hell. Beth thought constantly of Rhiannon and Morgan, but she dared not make another attempt to contact them. Only an hour's drive away, they might have well been on the other side of the planet. At night, she thought of Morgan, his lovely face and his hard, slender body against her, inside her. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle her groans of longing and pain. Sometimes she could hear Luke giggling through the wall, and his inexplicable mirth chilled her. She remembered when she and Morgan had been alone in the woods. They had been free. They'd been in ecstasy. Morgan standing there smiling with the owl perched on his arm. He didn't know. She couldn't bear it that he had put this vibrant, throbbing life into her and didn't know. But what if he didn't really love me? She thought, agonised. What if he lied and used me like everybody says? Would he chuck me like Jeanette's boyfriends and tell everyone I'm a slag? That was the real reason Beth dared not write. To find out that Morgan didn't care, that would kill her. The day he'd heard about his sister's pregnancy, Luke had asked God what to do. And God replied, "Tell the truth, shame the devil." Never as long as he lived would Luke forgive Beth for having sex with that wicked, depraved boy. In the darkness of his room, after his parents and sister had gone to bed, he spread an old car rug which he found in the shed on the carpet. That was his church. He tried to shake out the worst of the mould and the cobwebs. Then he dragged a bulging carrier bag from under the bed. Usually he kept it hidden under the compost heap because it smelled, but tonight he smuggled it into the house, and he began to remove the contents one by one and place them on the rug in careful rows. Rats, mice, birds, beetles, frogs, all dead. They formed his congregation. Luke was their pastor. He had complete power over them. They hung on his every word as he preached in whisper of good and evil, the supremacy of God, and the apocalypse in which only the chosen would ascend to heaven. Only those who follow me will survive. I am the prophet. He touched the corpses in turn, blessing them. He remembered how each one had died. "I killed you, but you will rise again," he told them. "I killed you to save your souls." Now it was time for the sacrifice. He pulled the shoebox from under the bed. A scuffling sound came from inside. Luke picked up his scalpel and lifted the lid. This was special. It was a white mouse he'd stolen from a boy at school. White and pure. "This is the sacrifice that will redeem you from your sins," he whispered. He held the mouse's head between his thumb and fingers, so it lay on its back in his palm. Its lips were drawn back from its tiny teeth, and its whiskers quivered. Luke drew the blade very delicately from its throat to its abdomen, so that when he pulled back the flaps to expose the organs, the glistening heart was still pulsing. He was a surgeon now, as skillful and precise as his father and grandfather, a real doctor, not a fake like Rhiannon. The mouse squealed, but not very loud. Luke put the words in its mouth. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Luke's heart was beating as fast as the mouse's. He put down the scalpel and pushed his finger into the mouse's guts. Hot and slippery with blood, he took the tiny heart between his thumb and finger and squeezed. Now he was God. He had power over life and death. To this mouse, at least, Luke was God. He laid the warm corpse down with the others. Now the sacrament. Luke unzipped his trousers. His penis was already hard. The semen would be the bread. And the wine? This is my body. This is my blood. With the tip of the scalpel, he nicked the head of his penis, so the liquid bread and wine flowed out together over his congregation. Afterwards, with everything cleared away and bundled under the bed, he lay in bed and chewed the sheet to stifle his giggles. Such was the ecstasy of power. "I understand now," Olivia said one afternoon as she watched Beth preparing the tea. Beth's back ached and she needed to sit down, but she wasn't allowed to until the chores were finished. "You are being used as a battleground between God and the devil. That's why this has happened." Olivia had grown calmer as the pregnancy progressed, but her eyes were china dolls, heartless. "A battleground," Beth echoed. To disagree would only invite her mother's wrath. Olivia stared frigidly at Beth's swollen abdomen. "So the sooner that abomination comes out, the better." "But you will help me look after it, won't you, Mum? You said you would." Beth lived every day in the vain hope of forgiveness. She couldn't bear to give up. "I told you I will deal with it." But Olivia's eyes stayed like glass, and Beth, suddenly and horribly, had to face the truth. She is going to kill it. Even if she doesn't kill it, she's going to treat it worse than she ever treated Luke, and if I let her, it will be my fault. 6 months of imprisonment, shame, indoctrination and nightmares had made Beth crazy. But she wasn't as crazy as Olivia. She still had enough reason left to know that she had already let this go on too long. She could either run for it or condemn the baby, or maybe herself, to death. When the searing contractions began, Beth was almost relieved. She was going somewhere now, either towards death or freedom. Her father drove her to the hospital. Olivia didn't want to know. And Philip was quite kind, the kindest she'd ever known him. But Beth gave birth alone, with green-robed strangers in cold lights of the delivery room. She screamed for Rhiannon. She screamed for Morgan, but he wasn't there. She prayed to the goddess Bast, protector of women in childbirth. At last, the demon split Beth's pelvis apart and came sliding out in a surge of blood. The demon was pink and helpless and innocent. A kind midwife told Beth it had been a normal delivery and only 9 hours. Beth knew one thing. She never wanted to go through it again. She cried when they put Irene in her arms. She cried for hours, couldn't stop, and didn't even know why she was crying. Philip smiled when he saw the baby, but the tears in his eyes were of grief, not joy. Her grandparents came once, trying to be nice but plainly uncomfortable. Luke never visited Beth in hospital at all. Beth looked at the flowers and the cards around every bed but hers, the hordes of cheerful, chattering visitors hugging the new mothers. But her own family behaved as if attending a funeral, and she knew Irene's arrival had brought no forgiveness. She hoped Olivia would soften when she first saw the infant, but she didn't. She looked at it in its crib, and her eyes stayed dead, like a fish on a slab. Beth thought, she's already killed it in her mind. And 4 days later, Beth was on the bus, alone with her terror and her unwanted burden. And soon she was lying, bleeding in the darkness outside an empty cottage, betrayed. All the sweetness and laughter, all the love, caresses and false promises she'd found here, gone. Snatched away, not only from her, but from the baby, who'd never hurt anyone. And that was supremely cruel. "We will be together, I promise." Beth stared through shadow masses of overgrown vegetation, garlands and spider ropes of neglected greenery silhouetted against an indifferent night sky. She felt the blood trickling out, hot as tears. Nothing more to hope for. They were demons in a fairy tale, Rhiannon and Morgan. They sucked you in and ruined you with pleasure, and then you woke up on a cold hillside and found the fairy palace, an ancient, deserted shell. And I'm afraid this is where our month-long celebration of Freda and my reading of Dark Cathedral comes to an end. This has been the first third of the Dark Cathedral book, which continues in part 2, Mother, Mate Dolorosa, which means Mother of Sorrows, and then continues later into part 3, Crone, the Horned Moon, and I highly recommend that you check it out. But of course, as I have done every time we have chatted, I would also like to shout out another one of Freda's books, and it seems to make sense that as this is our last time in chatting about this, that I recommend the sequel to Dark Cathedral, which is Pagan Moon. I can't tell you too much about it because I don't want to ruin the end of Dark Cathedral for you, but it is definitely worth a read once you have completed this one. So thank you all so much for joining me. I know these have been much longer videos than you are used to from me, and that's not to everybody's taste, but thank you to those of you that have stuck with me. Do let me know if this is something you would like to see more of in the future. Thank you to Freda once again from the bottom of my witchy little heart for giving me permission to share your wonderful words with the world through my tiny little platform. Freda, if you ever see this, your book, Dark Cathedral, has meant so much to me over the years. It has been a place of comfort that I turn to, and I'm just very grateful to have had this opportunity to share it with everybody else. That means so much to me. So I am gonna leave this here. Thank you so much. Please do all that YouTubey stuff. Support me on the Patreon and YouTube members if you can. Thank you to everybody that does already. And until next time, keep reading and stay crafty.